Hello, everyone. Hello. Welcome to another live stream. Not a huge amount of things to talk about this week. I didn't really have a huge amount of time to read stuff. So, yeah, that's kind of just how things are. So there's 3 books I'm going to be talking about, 2 of which I've read before, but reread this week. One which was totally new to me, and was one that I was kind of highly anticipating, so that was nice to actually get into it. But yeah, so I know the time might be a little bit iffy for some people. In the US, at least, I know that daylight savings has started, so it's the same time for them. It's 9 a.m. on the East Coast. But where I live, we don't have daylight savings. Australia does, but where I live, we don't. So it's actually a little bit earlier here than normal, which was it's something that I purposefully did because I've noticed over the last couple weeks that I've just been really tired doing them at 10 p.m. my time. So I wanted to see if this was going to be a little bit easier, a little bit better. We'll see. Who knows? We'll see. But it does seem like it might confuse people. I did try to give some fair warning about it, but I know that, not everyone follows me on Twitter and not everyone sees my updates or anything like that. It's totally fine, totally normal. But so the books that I read for this week, there's 3. The first one was, as I said, a reread, and that is All My Darling Daughters by Fumi Yoshinaga. So I read this because, for those unaware, this month's podcast episode was Fumi Yoshinaga Spotlight. It was my choice, and so I decided that I wanted to read a couple of her books before I got into the discussion, because unfortunately, despite her being my favorite mangaka, it's been a little while since I've read her books, especially reread her books. So this is a single volume put out by Viz. It's one of their signature editions, and this was actually nominated for an Eisner. This is a josei kind of collection of stories about different women and their lives, and they're sort of loosely interconnected. It's bookended by a relationship between a mother and daughter, or mother and adult daughter, and their sort of complicated family history and relationship. So it starts off with the daughter kind of reflecting on her life and growing up, and realizing that her mother, they're very close, but they also have quite a, I don't know if hostile is quite the right word, but they always argue. Her mother is very beautiful, but doesn't consider herself beautiful. And so when her mother gets cancer and survives it, she kind of decides, well, I'm going to stop living my life, scared, or I'm going to start living however I want to because life's too short. So she decides to remarry. Her husband's been dead for a long time. So she decides to remarry, and then abruptly tells her daughter, like, oh, I've gotten remarried. I want you to meet my new husband. And obviously the daughter's like, what? Huh? What? Excuse me, what? And so she introduces her new husband, who is a bright, fresh-faced 27-year-old, who is 3 years older than her, younger than her daughter. So obviously that's a little bit awkward for this young woman. And so at first she's like, Mom, you're being scammed. Like, there's no way that this handsome boy who wants to be an actor legitimately, wants to be married to you. But she learns more about their relationship and who they are. And there's a really lovely discussion about, being yourself and accepting yourself. And that's something that I've always really enjoyed about Yoshinaga's series. We get into it more in the podcast, so I don't want to ruin the episode preemptively by talking about it too much. But we have quite those story bookend mother-daughter. We also have a story about a professor who has a very one of his students, well, he's like an assistant professor, he's not even a professor, but one of his students keeps coming on to him and keeps offering him oral sex, and he's like, but why? At first he's really put off because he doesn't know this girl. Well, he knows she's one of the students, but he doesn't really like her or know her. And over time, he kind of catches feelings for her, but her self-perception is so warped that it's really hard for him to try and get her to value herself. It's really good. There's also a story about a bunch of middle school friends and where they ended up once they'd grown up. There was a story about the daughter and her relationship with her husband once she has moved out a couple years down the line after she leaves her mother's home. And then there's another story about a woman who is beautiful, kind of the perfect package, but has difficulty staying in lasting relationships and finding someone she can dedicate herself to. And that was a really interesting story to revisit as well. I love Yoshinaga. I don't really make that a secret. She's one of my favorite creators, if not my favorite creator, full stop. And we say this in the podcasts, but it's perpetually true in that all of her characters are very human. They're all characters that are recognizable. Hello, Yame-san. Welcome to the live stream. They're very recognizable. Even if they're not you personally, this, your friend is like this, or your mother's like this, or your co-worker's like this. You recognize these people in your own life. And I think there's something really valuable in that. This is definitely a book I highly recommend. And I know I'm biased, but I do think that this is some of the best out there when it comes to stories about women and treating women like complicated people, like actual people with lives, and who sometimes make bad choices, who sometimes aren't, amazing or terrible or whatever. They're just normal. They're just complicated, and sometimes they're weird, and sometimes they have stuff that they're unsure about, or that they're not that confident in. It's just super duper good. It's also really easy to read, I find, in one volume. So if you are looking for a josei, one that is in print, one that is pretty easy to get, I do recommend this. I also really love, I really love Yoshinaga's art style. I think it's very expressive. The way her paneling, the way that her characters show emotion and express emotion in the subtlest of expressions. And that's not something that we really got into in the podcast, was her art, but I find that you can be reading and at one moment you're laughing, at one moment you're crying, and it's just a really interesting thing to experience, but it's also a very human thing. And those two emotions and those two reactions aren't completely separate from each other as well. I'm sure a lot of people have had that kind of laughing hysterics because you're you're losing your mind in grief, or you're so upset that you have to laugh about it, or else you'll just be sobbing. And then unfortunately, and after that laughing, it devolves into sobbing, or that initial welling up of grief or sadness, which then breaks away into joy or happiness or humor. And I think that's, again, something that's really captured well in Yoshinaga's stuff. All My Darling Daughters is phenomenal. I do recommend it if you haven't read it. I will always recommend Yoshinaga's stuff on my channel. But it was nice to reread it. It's been a couple years, and it's just beautiful, and I really love it. So, hello, yes, Rin. It is very early. I'm sorry. I know that I kind of preemptively explained this at the beginning, but daylight savings has happened in the US. So the clocks have changed. So it is 9 a.m. their time on the East Coast. And because I was having issues staying up, not being overly tired when I was starting these at 10 p.m. my time, I wanted to see if I could just start them at 9 o'clock my time, rather than... So in the US, the time hasn't changed. I don't know about other countries, but obviously it's adjustable as to when and if you have daylight savings in your area. I don't, which is why, but I know it's inconvenient, and I did try to give a little bit of warning beforehand, but it's just, I can't please everyone, and I hope that next week it might be a little bit easier to have it sorted out, or people be more aware about it, because I've had a long week. I haven't read a lot, and so I wanted to see if the earlier time, my time, would help in my being less exhausted at the end of these live streams. So yes, this was the first book that I read, All My Darling Daughters, reread, because obviously I've read it before. The next is also another reread, another Fumi Yoshinaga's book, another one that I reread for the podcast. Although we didn't talk about this one specifically, but it was good to revisit it because I remembered parts of it, but I didn't remember all of it. And that is Garden Dreams. So this is a 1-volume book collection, sort of short stories, which are loosely connected, similarly, well, more directly connected than All My Darling Daughters, but they're similar books, where a young minstrel, bard, musician, so there's a war between the East and the West, and our main character, what is his name? Farad was found wandering the desert after his parents were killed in this war, and he was taken in by his adoptive father called Saud, who was a stoic guy, who we find out lost his children in this war, and he travels around and sings and plays instruments and all, what wandering musicians do. So the two of them become this kind of odd family, found family with each other, and they are together for quite a while, about 10-ish so years, and one day they end up in the West. The war is now long gone, and they end up at a baron's house where they perform, and so the baron really loves their performance, their music, so much he kind of offers them a place to stay and encourages them to stay there. But we discover that the Baron's adoptive daughter, a young girl whom he found in the desert, is actually the biological daughter of Farad's adoptive father, Saad. So the two reunite, reconnect, and leave in the middle of the night after reconnecting. So it leaves Farad and this Baron alone together, kind of left behind again, and their relationship together after that point, finding and helping each other when, you know, so much has happened in their life, so much tragedy has happened in their life up until that point. And then later in the book, we see the Baron's background, his two loves, his first love, who was a young girl he met in the forest, who coincidentally was betrothed to him, but she died. She had a very untimely death before the night before their wedding. She was murdered, which obviously broke his heart. He was totally in love with her. And then a couple years later, he actually gets married to the older sister of his first love. And they have kind of a rocky relationship initially, but they grow to love each other too. And but at one point he doubts her feelings for her, and she, and things happen. He's once again left alone, tragically. So he's been looking for fulfillment in his life after losing everyone that he's ever loved. And of course, losing his adoptive daughter just feeds into that. So it's sort of a tragedy, but ultimately a hopeful and happy end to these two very lonely characters. It's not a BL. I want to put that out there. It's not a BL. Yoshinaga has done BL, but this is not that. And it's really good. It's really good. It's sweet. It's lovely. It is more in line with stuff like Gerard and Jacques, or, some of her more historical fiction comparatively to something like What Did You Eat Yesterday? It is, it's more so in line with her European historical fiction, more in line with her Rosa Versailles Dojin versus her other stuff that we've seen in the past. But again, beautiful, expressive, lovely, and I just love it. I love it so much. I think it's not my favorite, of course. Hello, Yori Moon. Welcome to the live stream. But I do think that, like with a lot of Yoshinaga's works, especially the DMP titles, especially like this one, it's very cheap and easy to get. I don't know how many copies they printed of this, but you can still get it very, very easily for very cheap. And so, yeah, it's. I mean, what else am I supposed to say about it? It's really good. I'm definitely not an unbiased reviewer when it comes to Yoshinaga's titles, but both of these, I mean, if you're wanting to get into her work, if you're wanting to try her stuff without investing a lot of money into stuff like What Did You Eat Yesterday, or Oku, or have to worry about out-of-print volumes and stuff like Antique Bakery, or never getting the last volume of Flower of Life, those are really solid starts to being introduced to her work, introduced to her style. And so, yeah, those were the rereads that I had this week. And I only read one other book. So this is probably going to be a pretty quick live stream. And I didn't plan for that to have happened, but I just didn't read a whole lot this week, unfortunately. So the other thing that I read, I've had this book for a little while. I just hadn't gotten around to actually reading it. And that is Volume 1 of Maison and Koku by Rumiko Takahashi. This is the first of probably 7-8 volumes of this. I guess, I don't know if perfect edition is quite the right word, but a fancy new re-release from Viz of this classic from this phenomenal mangaka. I will say, and I am ashamed to say, that this is the first of her. Well, I've read a little bit of Urusei Yatsura. I've read a little bit of Ranma 1/2, and I've watched Ranma 1/2. And I've seen like bits and pieces of Inuyasha when it used to be on Adult Swim. But this is the first Rumiko Takahashi series I've ever owned. It's also the first that I'm probably going to read in full. I do want to get Mermaid Saga at some point, because that seems to be... I've had a lot of people recommend it to me as very in line with I'm very interested in trying it. But I was never... Inuyasha was a little bit before my time, and by the time I got into anime, it was a little bit outside of my interest. So I've never seen Inuyasha in like its entirety. I've never followed any of her other titles. As I said, I've been watching Ranma 1/2, and I do enjoy that, but it's really super long. A lot of her comedy stuff I find is really fun, but it's also very repetitive. And so it's fun to watch a couple episodes like on a evening, but having 40 odd volumes of a manga can be a little bit just samey, which is not like, that's not the worst crime ever. And it obviously it's a testament to how incredible she is and how many popular series she's managed to create. She's amazing. She's amazing. Yes, I've heard Mermaid Saga is good. The fact that it's like a horror, or like at least creepy, the fact that it's more, kind of yokai focused, mystery focused, is something that interests me more than something like Inuyasha, Urusei Yatsura. I mean, I read Urusei Yatsura. It's fun, it's funny, but it's one of those things that I might watch the anime one day, if and when we get it. But it's not like must have. It's more so for the cultural significance in anime and manga that Loom and Urusei Yatsura as a whole has had. Hello, Bizarre. Welcome to the stream. Yeah, and I think it's exactly like I think that there's a certain length of book, like I've said it before, but when it comes to me and my reading and my collection, my sweet spot for series are like 10 to 15 volumes. 20 is like pushing it for a lot of genres, for a lot of titles, and above that means it's really, really good, and I'm really loving it, and or it's something that I really enjoy and want to keep reading. But those are very few and far between. I have very few series over 30 volumes, 25 volumes even. And with Ranma and Urusei Yatsura and a lot of her... So even Inuyasha, like obviously it's a different genre, but it's repetitive. And I feel like it works when you're reading week to week or whatever in a magazine, because you get comfortable with, the stereotypes of every character, and you know what to expect, and it's fun, and it's funny, and you like these characters. But when you're sitting down and reading through it as a collected volume, it's like, okay, yes, I've seen this 12 times before, 100 times before. There's only so much humor you can pull out of the same joke over and over and over and over again. Which is why, yeah, Ranma 1/2, even Inuyasha, where like obviously they're fighting, it's just the repetition is less interesting to me compared to Maison and Koku, which, okay, so if you're not aware, Maison and Koku follows initially a Ronin, a young guy who failed his university exams. He's trying to get into university, and he lives at this, boarding house with a bunch of crazy characters, a mother and her son, I guess, hostess woman, a guy who like constantly pervs on the hostess girl or waitress or whatever she is, and a couple other, interesting characters. And it's just a crazy life, but one day this beautiful girl comes to become the boarding house manager, and he falls quickly in love, but she's very standoffish. She's not that interested initially. She's very much I don't know if tsundere is quite the right word. But she is kind of like that hot and cold. She doesn't dislike him, but she also is attached. She's a widower, so she's still attached to the memory of her husband who died like 6 months into their marriage. So, it's a rom-com with a bunch of crazy fun characters who all live in this big boarding house, and it's sweet. It's sweet. Obviously, very much Takahashi's art style, her style of humor. It is, not afraid to be that kind of slapsticky 80s, 90s style of rom-com. And yeah, so this will be the original single volume series is 15 volumes, so I would suspect it's probably going to be 7, maybe 8 volumes. I don't know exactly how many volumes are in these signature editions, but I would presume 1.5, if not 2. So yeah, I will be reading this. This is one that a lot of people love, and it's one that I have wanted to read for a long time. And I don't know, I like crazy kind of wacky fun characters hanging out with each other and causing each other problems and getting on each other's nerves, but at the same time caring about each other. I think there's just a lot of fun that can be pulled out of this sort of boarding house style of story. But yeah, Rin, I agree in that when we talk about romantic comedies in particular, there's, and I've read plenty that are more than 20 volumes, but I also don't own those. A good example is Ore-sama Teacher, which you might not be able to tell, but is actually there. Those books there, there's stacked library books, so that's volume 11 to 20. I've read 1 to 10, so there's 28, 29 volumes in all of that series. Hello, 365801. Welcome to the live stream. I know it's at a little bit odd time. I apologize, but I daylight savings and other weirdness going on, and not a lot of books to talk about this week either. So, but for me, and I romance and comedy and romantic comedy, like comedy, dependent on the series and dependent on how exactly. There's Skip Beat is one of the few exceptions to the rule. Where it's 45 volumes and I'm still really invested and I still am reading it and buying it and loving it. And yeah, in fairness, it has a lot of plot progression. It has a lot of story that's outside of the romance. It has a lot of story that isn't just comedy as well. Comparatively to Urusei Yatsura or Ranma or stuff like Kimi ni Toroke or Urusama Teacher or even stuff like Horimiya and Monthly Girls Nozaki-kun, which I do really love. They don't need to be any longer than, they definitely do not need to be 20 volumes, right? Like, I don't think that's that controversial. Horimiya has just ended, or is just ending at 16 volumes in Japan. Monthly Girls Nozaki-kun, I don't know how long it'll go, but it's only at 11 volumes right now. I could see it, maybe hitting the upper teens, but it's just, yeah. Series that are just more than gags and romantic relationships. In so far as storyline, I'm trying to think about if this is related to those stories needing to be under 20 volumes, or those stories are fine if they are 20 volumes. Maybe I'm already tired and I'm not making sense of that, but I do think that, like, I don't know, comedy, like straight up comedy series, stuff like Daily Life of High School Boys, Nichijou, etc., even Yotsuba, like, I feel like there's a sweet spot of 10 to 15 volumes where that's all it needs to be. That's all it needs to be. You get enough time out of each of the jokes. But it's also not outstaying its welcome. And a lot of the, like, purely romance stuff, the romantic drama stuff as well. I mean, I get annoyed at Ao Harurai, but at least it's only 13 volumes. Because comparatively, even a series that I did really enjoy, like Kimi ni Toroke, absolutely did not need to be 30 volumes long. That series did not need to be 30 volumes long whatsoever. That was a lot. I would also agree in that, for me, the romance is just like an additional element for Skip Beat. It's not something that I'm like, it's going to have a romance in it, and it's going to, develop that way regardless. But Kyoko is so much more of a compelling character than just following her love life. There's her friends, her platonic friends, and also, like, watching how her relationship shifts in regards to the people around her, including the boy who, like, broke her heart initially. It's just really interesting. Like, there's a lot of really cool stuff in that series. The art is broken as all heck. The art is rough, and you think it gets better, and then you're like, oh, this is fine, I didn't even notice it. But then you get to the panel, and you're like, oh my god. That anatomy is not working out for you. But regardless, it's still really compelling, and you're really invested. Yes, her relationship with Sho, I find it really interesting. I think that was done really well. But, I also like her relationship with Momo. I like her relationship with everyone she comes across, all of the people she comes across, the story arc about her mother and that kind of trauma that she has from that. It's just really, really good. And it's more than just, you read it for everything else going on. The romance is just kind of like, oh, that's nice, that's fun, that's good to have. And Yona's another good example. There's a lot of plot going on. All of the characters are really interesting, all really compelling. There's a lot of political stuff going on, war games, stuff like that. Plus, romance is just kind of there. But you're like, oh my goodness, there's also the complicated relationships that she feels about Suwon, and the complicated, feelings that Hawk has, even because they care about each other, but also they don't, drama. Oh my goodness. So Yona is another one that no matter how long it goes, I will still buy it and support it because I love it. I'm sometimes feel like I sound really harsh about these sorts of things. That's not the case. If I love a series, I will absolutely keep reading it until it finds its conclusion. I haven't given Kaguya-sama a chance yet, just because I've had so much. I want to get to it at some point. I just haven't had the time. There's so many books to read and so little time to do so. And so stuff like Yona, stuff like Snow White with the Red Hair, stuff like Skip Beat, hell, even stuff like Monthly Girls Nozaki-kun, that can absolutely keep going, and I will be happy. I'll be happy to support it. But at the same time, if it wanted to finish, at 28 volumes, 35 volumes, whatever it might be, I'm not going to be heartbroken about it, because I do think that there's a lot of ways you can end a story like that. And ultimately, if you have enough story to keep going, you absolutely should keep going. But a lot of creators don't always have that additional story to keep going. We see it a lot in a lot of different genres. It's endemic in Shonen Jump stuff. That if something's popular, you just keep pumping it out until you stop making money on it. But thankfully, for me at least, I'm trying to think of ongoing titles that I have that are longer and are already long and will be longer, that I know. It's finished, but Kazahikuru is one that's finished at 45 volumes. Snow White with the Red Hair is ongoing. That's got 23-ish volumes, maybe more. Skip Beat, obviously, 40-odd volumes. Yona, that's at 33, 34 volumes now at this point, ongoing. And those are all, the romantic comedy stuff. Outside of that, well, Haikyuu's finished, but that's still going on technically in English at 45 volumes is finished. Only a couple more volumes until that's done, though. Black Butler, which I enjoy despite its myriad of problems. I do still like that series quite a bit, and I'm quite interested to see how it wraps up, because it is heading into its ending. What else? I don't know. I really don't know. Vinland Saga, but I kind of forget about that because it's an omnibus, so I'm like, oh, well, 2-in-1s don't really count. Hunter X Hunter, or Hunter Hunter. Why did I say the X? I'm not, I never say it that way. Yes, that's very true. And also, that is also true. It was on hiatus. When it returns from the war, I will celebrate. But that, again, is, no matter how long that gets, I will always continue to pick it up because I love that series beyond compare. Chihayafuru is also another one that I'm like, if by some miracle, which will never happen, but if by some miracle it sees the light of day in print, I would absolutely buy all 40 plus volumes and be like, here you go, Kodansha, here's all of my money. But I don't think they're willing to risk it unless they put it out in omnibus. They might do that. 2-in-1s or 3-in-1s might be an option, depending on how long the series is. By the end of it, it is still ongoing, so it's hard to know. Yeah. I would spend my money. I hope that it's not as long, but I hope that Denpa's release of March Comes in Like a Lion might kind of encourage more of that style of weird sports series to see their way to print. Because Kodansha, I am waiting. I will give you money. I would. And then I'm trying to think of like the completed stuff that's all over 20 volumes that I have. I mean, again, aside from Haikyuu, Kakaishi is 35 volumes. Wonderful series. Love it a lot. Didn't necessarily expect to, but absolutely fell in love with that series. I mean, Hikaru no Go's over 20 volumes. That's a little bit on the longer side. Is there anything else? I don't know. I can't remember, which is bad because it's just I was just in there, half hour ago. I don't know if I've read the most recent Vinland stuff, so maybe that's true. It's definitely, got a lot of stuff happening in it, so I could see it wrapping up. It's kind of hit its point, and if it ended with this arc, it absolutely would be a perfect ending, but I also, at the same time, there's ways that it could develop as well, so who knows. Noragami I could also see. I think there's been a couple of points where it's like, oh, Noragami could end now, but then there's like also really cool stuff going on, and there's a couple points where you're like, oh yeah, it would be great if it ended here, but then somehow the next arc just keeps getting better and better and better, and you're like, oh yeah, that is right, man. True. Keep going, Noragami, and again, I will buy it. I will support them. I haven't read Wallflower. I don't know why it was so long. It was like 32 or 34 volumes, right? It was just a lot of volumes. I watched the anime and it annoyed me. It annoyed me so much that I was like, no, this one's not for me. Wallflower was interesting. Magi, I read. I used to own a lot of the volumes. I used to own like 17 or 18-ish volumes. And then I was reading it digitally. And then I read it through my library. And I finished it. And I was like, oh my god, it jumped the shark. That whole last 2 arcs were... Oh my... You think I lose my mind over Clamp stuff? I don't know what the hell was going on with Magi. Magic, future, shell phones. It was just bizarre. It was bizarre and weird. And I was like, this is the strangest thing. Because, okay, magic excuses a lot. And I did like Magi. I mean, I was always I didn't really like the fan servicey aspects of it, but the characters were fine. I liked it enough that it was, interesting. It had the cool, Arabian Nights aesthetic with magic and stuff. And, it had, a Hogwarts style, magic school style, arc, and that was fine. And they had a couple of different art, and Sinbad was interesting. And then it just like got to a point, a very specific point, and I'm like, what is going on? And then I wouldn't read a volume for months, and I'd forgotten everything. I remembered that I thought it was crazy, but would have forgotten the specifics. And then I read the next volume, what is going on? And then it kind of like comes flooding back. It's like trauma suppressed it, right? And it would just rush back and be like, oh my god, I remember, and it was horrifying. Well, not horrifying. It was just like, I don't know. That's one. That's like two or three arcs, just a little too long. And I mean, it was always fun in the beginning. I felt it lost its fun aspect of it towards the ending. But maybe I'm just a cynical old coot who doesn't like silly shonen, which is bizarre because I read a lot of silly shonen. Fullmetal Alchemist is another one of the longer ones. I kind of forget that that's so long because Fullmetal Alchemist is, for an action shonen, in my opinion, the perfect length. It wraps up all of its story arcs. It has very full development for all of the characters, and it didn't despite its popularity, it didn't stretch itself out for far too long. And I think that's the difference between, again, and not to harp on Weekly Shonen Jump because I don't hate them. I hate their environment and from what we can tell, their work culture, right? But I don't hate like all of the series that comes out of that. I in fact love a lot of their series, or at least enjoy them very readily. But the difference is night and day. Like compare, you know, even Hunter x Hunter. I mean, obviously it's riddled with hiatuses, but at 35 volumes or 37 volumes or whatever, there's so much more that has had been fulfilled action story wise and character wise than all, how many chapters? 700 chapters of Naruto. And I like, Naruto was fine, but again, like, it got to a point and I was like, why is this like this? This is retroactively ruining earlier stuff. And so, yeah, for those who don't know, when the COVID lockdown started, I read the entirety of Naruto in like, I don't know, 6 months-ish. And at first I was like, man, I absolutely can understand why it's super popular. I actually really like Naruto. I didn't expect that, like the character. These characters are really cool. Wow, like there's a lot going on in here that I like. And there's a lot of emotional subtlety despite, you know, the silliness. And there's like, even Sasuke isn't the worst. Like, he's fine. And all of this is going on. And then it gets to a point and you're like, okay, this is where the popularity polls were coming in and everyone likes Sasuke more than Naruto, so we got to focus on. But then other stuff, like, it fell apart. It fell apart. It hit points. It was like, I don't know if Kishimoto had plans for any of this. And then the last arc happened and I was like, why? And then everything suffered from what I call a Star Wars syndrome, where it's really only like two families who are the most important and all the important stuff happens to them and everything's due to fate. I'm like, why can't people save the world or fix things or whatever that aren't related to each other, that isn't related to fate, that aren't destined to be? I don't know. It's kind of, I feel like that's a sad thing for children to read. It's like, oh, well, I guess you have to be born a hero. You can't just try to be the best you are and do the best you can, because there's always going to be someone who is automatically, biologically granted the ability to be the hero who saves the day at the end because of their genealogy. And that's what it kind of fell into. I mean, aside from like all the dead people coming back to life to fight the big fight, and there's the longest sigh in the world. And thus I was like, well, that's over. And I have zero interest in following the progeny of Naruto and Co, because I don't care about any of their children. That's the other thing. Like, okay, I understand why you want to have like a spin-off of your super popular title, right? Like, I absolutely understand why Kishimoto would want to keep that cash cow going. You want to keep the Naruto-verse alive, but why does it have to be Naruto's son? Like, why couldn't you have a kid doing other stuff, having other adventures, and every character isn't the child of characters we cared about earlier, because they're too closely related to characters that we care about. So now you're asking us to, like, those characters are old and we're not allowed as, Jump readers to be interested in adults, right? So why couldn't, if you're going to have new kid characters, why do they have to be the kids of the main characters? It's sort of the same argument as Fruits Basket, but at least Fruits Basket, one, it's only 3 volumes, but 2, I find it a little bit poetic in like how in the original, the Somas were helped by Toru, and the Somas helped Toru get out of their own toxic cycles and the own cycle of abuse. And then in the sequels, because they're all happy and have like passed on those values, those stories to their children, those children are then able to help someone else in their own, escape their own cycle of abuse and escape their own tragedy. It's it is also like absolutely fan service to be like, oh, look at all the children of these characters, but at the same time I have way more interest, and I'm not even interested in those kids, but it's more interesting than like Boruto and Co. I'm not gonna read it, and I don't care about what's happening to them. It's also and I'm 400 comments behind. I'm sorry, I am looking at them. Boys Over Flowers, I feel like I'll get to one day. I'm pretty sure it's on the Jump app, but it's just so long. It's so long. I'm glad that people are agreeing that Wallflower was not the best. I did not like it, and they were aggravating and annoying. And Magi was bizarre and crazy. Soul Eater is also 25 volumes. I do think that Soul Eater was a little long. Well, no, Soul Eater's problems weren't that it's long. I think that the story developed at a pretty quick pace and was wrapped up pretty perfectly. Like, all of the events that happened were relevant and timely to when they needed to happen. My issue with Soul Eater, and I say this as someone who did enjoy Soul Eater, and is buying the new version, like the new editions of it, is the fan service. And I've said it before. I'm not a prude. I don't care if there's boobs in manga. I don't care enough like, I'm not some Puritan who gets shocked at a panty shot. It's not that. It's that the fan service in that series, as well as Fire Force, and I haven't read Biichi, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's in that as well. It just grinds the plot progression to an absolute halt. Just a screeching halt to be like, oh, look, sexy girl, boobs. And then it's like, okay, enough of that. Let's keep going on with the plot. I'm like, which is kind of sad because I really like the aesthetic of Soul Eater. I like the characters a lot in Soul Eater. I think it's a really fun, interesting world, really diverse cast, a lot of really cool powers, and there's a lot I really enjoy in Soul Eater, but man, the titty. The titties are just like, okay, you got Blair, you got Tsubaki, you got Maka's father, who's just an absolute pervert, and like, what? Oh, God. And you've got like every female character of both of the twins, or every female character. I don't know if there's a single female character in the series. Maybe Maka, because she doesn't have a good figure, who isn't shown in like a bath scene at some point in Soul Eater. And I'm like, why can't you just stick to the cool witch fights? Like, why can't you just do that? And in saying that, I think Soul Eater, like, it's a different tone, but I think that Soul Eater Not is a good spin-off. In the way that, like Rin said, if you want, and not that Soul Eater Not is the main characters, but you do see the main characters, and it's just like a slice of life, day-to-day, sort of Yuri, set in the same world, and it's not brilliant, it's not like super amazing, but it's more of this world that you enjoy. You get to meet some new characters, you get to learn a little bit more about the school and the town and this idea of Weapon and Meister outside of the grand, huge action plot of the original series. And with Soul Eater Not, sometimes like, oh hey, there's Death the Kid, or like there's Maka and Soul, or there's such and such, and you're like, I know those characters. These obviously this is happening at a similar time. They're all related. Insofar as like the story, maybe it's happening during this, maybe it happened afterwards, maybe it happened before. It doesn't really matter, because sometimes, you know, life isn't always going to be the big grand boss fight at the end of the story. Sometimes, you know, it's between fighting this witch and fighting this witch, there's like a week, and maybe in that week the characters went out for ice cream or had to do a book report or something, and like that's like, it's not interesting when you're invested in like, oh my gosh, what are all these witch mysteries, what, I want to see a cool fight. But afterwards, after that's all happened and the day has been saved and everybody's happy and the world, it didn't end, but you still love these characters, you still enjoy this world, you just want to be like, okay, so what would happen if they all went out for ice cream? So, you know, like, I don't hate Soul Eater Not. I don't think it's as good, and I do think that like it leans into the more aesthetic, but you know, a lot of the original female character designs, I like Patty. I always see as not moe as such, but I don't think the girl, I don't remember their name. Is Tanya one of them? There's 3 girls, and I don't remember any of them. Tanya, maybe the princess and the weapon girl and the other girl, and I don't remember. Oh, the ditzy one with the titties. One of them's always gonna have the titties, but the ditzy girl. They're all just kind of like, yeah, you know. This is also Archangel manga. This is also very hard to agree, right? Because there are all these, not like Naruto's all of these ninjas, and it's established it's like a ninja world. But then at the end, they're fighting a freaking moon god. I'm like, what? What? Why though? Like, couldn't we just fight other ninjas this whole time? And then in the last arc, because there's all these villages, right, or towns, and then it's like established that there's normal people or like non-ninja people, which, like, okay, fair. Not everyone can be a ninja, but then they have like a whole village which is just samurai. I'm like, why are you introducing samurai in like volume 67 out of 72? This doesn't. I don't understand why this is needed. It's just you being like, oh, how I've run out of ninja stuff. I've run out of ninja stuff. The camera can't even handle how much ninja stuff I've already covered. So we're just going to throw in samurai. We're going to throw in the idea of Kaguya, Princess Kaguya. We're going to throw in reincarnation and freaking necromancy and magic beams. And I'm like, you already had like different ninja powers. It's like it got confused with the sci-fi stuff that Kishimoto wanted to do later in his career. Obviously, like Samurai 8 and stuff. But yeah, man, I don't. By the end of it, I was like, man, I really liked this a lot, and I can absolutely understand why people who had been following the series for years, who'd loved the series for years, who were super dedicated, hate it. Like, they hate the ending. They hate it after it hits, like, volume 50. Man, it just, that series fell off hard. And I didn't go into it wanting to dislike it. I didn't go into it, like, with any preconceived notion aside from, like, obviously I knew some of the characters. I will say that, like, I was so surprised that despite all of the stuff that I had absorbed through osmosis, cultural osmosis, over the course of my anime career in regards to Naruto, I had never heard of anyone discussing Sai, who was the Sasuke replacement after a certain point. I had never heard of him. Like, oh my gosh. And then some of my friends were like, yeah, he was popular because he was still like an emo sad boy. And I'm like, I understand that, but also this is the first I've ever heard of him. And I'd heard of like 1010 and freaking all of these other side characters. I'm like, yeah, I know who these are. This guy was sort of like, he was not a main character. He absolutely wasn't utilized ever, but like, he was kind of meant to be a replacement for one of the main characters for a while, and I never heard of him. I never heard of him. Hello, Zach. Welcome to the live stream. I'm actually surprised this lasted an hour because I only had 3 books to talk about. But yeah, in extension to that, 365801, I definitely agree that, like, I haven't read or watched Gintama. I know it's like one of the glaring missing series of I guess my generation of fandom that I just never got to. I streamed probably 2-3 episodes, maybe a little bit more, and it's one that I do want to get back to, but again, it's daunting. It's very long, but I've heard nothing but good things, and it's funny, and it's like, it's sort of like, and I mean, so comparatively, I've watched Sket Dance. I watched all 70 something episodes of Skit Dance, and that creator was an assistant working on Gintama initially. So they're very similar, obviously, aside from one is like a kind of sci-fi setting, historical sci-fi setting, whereas one is just like modern day school Japan. But the same premise of like, oh, a club that'll do everything, or a group of people who do anything and help fix problems and whatever. And it's got absurd comedy, and like I love Skit Dance, but then also like it's got really hard-hitting emotional character drama, and because you love these characters and you've laughed about them and they've made all their dumb jokes over the course of the several dozens of episodes, when it gets to the serious stuff you're like crying. Is so it hits you in your heart. And I know that Gintama's the same, I just haven't actually watched or read it, but it's on my to-do list, and I will stand by the fact that I want someone to license Skit Dance. I legitimately do. I still think about certain jokes from that series and laugh. I think about all of the characters' sad backstories and like legitimately get really sad. Exactly. The twins, but also switch off. That arc fucking killed me, dude. I cried so hard. Also, I mean, the twin stuff is sad, but also I was kind of like, no doctor would ever do that shit. What the hell is this? But, you know, drama. You gotta suspend, you know, your disbelief a little bit for the feels. But man, Skit Dance is way better than it ever had any right to be. Right. Damn it. I really like that show. But yeah, Gintama is on the like at some point to watch / read. I will get to it. Maybe not read, because obviously it's incomplete in English and I don't want to read scans and, you know, etc. But I'm pretty sure it's all streaming. I don't know, I'd have to check nowadays, but it's one that I definitely do want to get to. Rin, you're not wrong. Honestly, like, I mean, Naruto himself is loud. I mean, oh god, these teens yell too much to be stealthy. But also, when you wear an orange jumpsuit in the forest, you're not trying to be stealthy. Let's be real. But also, like, I think it helped that I was reading it, because all of the yelling that I know the character is doing, I don't have to listen to it. Like, I can just have it in my brain and be like, oh, yeah, they're not yelling that loud, comparatively to the anime where, you know, the voice actors are putting their all into every line of dialogue, and I'm just like, oh my god. Children, oh my god. It's like if I ever start Black Clover, which I may one day, not the anime, but if I ever start Black Clover, which, you know, never say never, I know that it'll probably be a little bit more palatable, a little bit easier to get into. Reading the series versus watching and or listening to it. Just can't deal with all these yelling teens. I know they're excited to do the thing, but man, I'm not excited for them to be excited about doing the thing. To have that energy once again, man, the enthusiasm. Yes, Gintama, literally the Gintama and Skit Dance crossover episode is like the entirety of my Gintama experience. Oh my goodness, what's that from? Why am I coughing? But yeah, it definitely It was a lot of fun. And I didn't have really anything else to talk about. I complained about stuff again, and I didn't mean to, especially because I didn't have a whole bunch of stuff to talk about, honestly. For those who missed the actual books that I read this week, I didn't read a huge amount, which is why I was going on tangents about long-running series and shonen and jumping the shark and all of these things. I read Maison and Koku, Volume 1, the first Rumiko Takahashi series that I actually am owning. And this is what spawned the conversation, because I was saying that a lot of Takahashi's works are fun and funny, but they're also 40 volumes long and repetitive, and thus, not something that I'm super interested in buying and collecting and having. Comparatively, Maison and Koku is only 15 volumes, and so about 7-8 volumes in this edition, and I've heard great things. This first volume was really enjoyable. I do like Rumiko Takahashi. I don't want to give the impression that I don't like her work, but this and Mermaid Saga, obviously her 2 shorter works, as well as a couple of her other stuff, but these are actually, this and Mermaid Saga have more recognition than stuff like One Pound Gospel and stuff. It's just more interesting and more I'm going to read it and probably enjoy it, and I'm happy to make space for them compared to trying to find room for 42 volumes of Inuyasha / Urusei Yatsura / Ranma 1/2. It's just too much. The other books that I read were rereads. I read them for the podcast. Garden Dreams by Fumi Yoshinaga, which is really solid, really good. If you're interested, check it out. It's all super cheap to get because it's been out of print forever, but I presume DMP printed 10,000 copies and sold about 10. So you can get them new for very cheap, or secondhand for even cheaper. So, it's not difficult to find. Interesting collection of interconnected stories, which seem initially tragic but end with a pretty happy ending. Very lovely, very much in line with her early pre-debut Rose of Versailles Dojin, kind of in line with that. And then the other title was another Fumi Yoshinaga title, because this month's podcast was Fumi Yoshinaga, and that is All My Darling Daughters, another 1 volume. This is from Viz. Absolutely phenomenal if you're wanting a short, sweet, perfect josei story about a whole bunch of different women. This one, read this one. Read this one. Buy this one. Read this one. It was actually nominated for an Eisner many years ago now. Didn't win, unfortunately, but it absolutely was deserving of the nomination. And yeah, it's about a whole bunch of different women and their lives, and they're sort of loosely interconnected. And it's really good, fun, funny. Like with all of Yoshinaga's stuff, she writes very human characters. All of her characters feel like real people who actually exist. I showed this earlier, but I know there's only 1 person on the stream, if that. So I'm going to subject you to it again. But yeah, Fumi Yoshinaga, if you haven't been around long enough to notice, I love her work. She is my number 1 favorite mangaka of all time. I own all of her works available in English, including all of the rare and super out of print, impossible to find volumes. That thanks to a mix of luck and me just being like, I will spend. Thankfully, I have never actually spent a huge amount of money on any of her titles, including Volume 4 of Flower of Life. But read her work. Read and buy her work because it deserves to be read. And if you're not wanting to invest in like Koku or What Did You Eat Yesterday, which are many, many volumes long, the short and sweet stuff is just as good. Just as good. And Antique Bakery anime adaptation is also really good. So check that one out. Available on DVD thanks to Nozomi Entertainment. And it's fun and funny and heartbreaking and full of drama. Full of drama, and is absolutely the only one of her series that could possibly be turned into an anime, because all her other stuff is too normal. Too normal. It's about normal, boring people with their own normal drama lives. But yeah, so those are the 3 books that I read this week. I did actually want to read a whole bunch more, but I didn't have a huge amount of time to read this week because I had a long week. I had a lot of bad luck this week as well, unfortunately. Hopefully next week is better. Always positive look to the future. Hopefully next week is better. And hopefully I have more to talk about. I do have a lot more books to read. I'm trying to get through as many as I can. Yeah, my stack is really big over there. Plus a bunch of library manga and stuff to get through. Zach, my favorite Fumi Yoshinaga work is Flower of Life. It was also maybe my first, but very early on in my career of reading her stuff. But in saying that, I do think that most, if not all, of her titles, including her BL, are all really interesting. They have a real sensibility to them that is very quintessentially her style. There's, like with a lot of creators, you tend to see her interests pop up again and again in her titles. So focus on food. Gay men typically are main characters in her titles, even her non-BL stuff. So Antique Bakery, What Did You Eat Yesterday, even Oku to a certain extent. Gay men and women. Not exclusively, of course. But those 2 things. She likes historical fiction. She likes cooking and recipes. She likes fat men. Like, she's sexually attracted. Like, her perfect man, she said in her somewhat autobiographical manga, Not Love But Delicious Food Makes Me So Happy, that her dream man is a sumo wrestler who has a good appetite, and that's just her who she wants, which is also interesting because she portrays overweight and fat people very positively, which of course is also very much a rarity in manga. Yeah, it's interesting. She's very, very interesting, but more so than any of that, and I said it at the beginning of the live stream, but all of her characters feel like real people, like people you recognize in your life, whether they be friends, family, co-workers, yourself. They're complicated, they're nuanced. There's a lot of very human interaction with their characters, and every character has a purpose. In the podcast, we talked about how unusual and refreshing, especially for its age, her BL had female characters who had agency, who had a reason to be in the story that wasn't just like some jealous snake who was trying to ruin and break up the gay couple and all. Like, they were just normal girls or normal women, people who, were friends or family or whatever, co-workers, and every person, they make good decisions, they make bad decisions, they make stupid decisions, but you absolutely understand why they make those decisions. yeah, it's she also has just a really great way of, you'll be reading, right? And you saw her art style. It's not super like detailed or like a huge amount of background or anything like that, but the expressiveness of her characters, the subtlety of expression, change in expression, is just so incredibly well done. You can see just the slightest change in demeanor, the slightest shift in emotion, between two panels, and it's just artfully done. It's just so perfectly done. And between in one page, you can be laughing at the first panel, and within 3 panels, you're crying, and accepting that those two reactions, those two emotions, aren't completely separated from each other. She's also really funny. Like, she has a lot of really funny elements, but also like she understands and accepts and extrapolates on the bittersweet elements of life, and how, there's never going to be a perfect decision that makes everyone happy. The best you can do is to accept yourself, be happy in yourself, know that you don't have to change yourself if you're not hurting anyone, and find the people who put up with you despite that, or who can accept you for who you are and don't expect you to change, even if maybe you should change. Ultimately, like, it would be better if you did change, right? But if you don't, the world's not gonna end. It's fine. Like, if you're happy, if the people around you are happy, or at least not overly annoyed, like, it's fine. It's fine. But yeah, Flower of Life is my favorite. Oku is also really great. Does have a bit of not a bit. It has a difficult tone of translation. They tried to do fake old-timey English, eloquent. It doesn't work. But it is something that, for me, I was able to get over. Once you read it and you're involved, it's not too distracting. But I do know that, like, in our discussion about it, Ray has a very, very difficult time. And it's something that impeded her reading with it and impeded her enjoyment of it. But it is a phenomenal series regardless. Like, don't let translation put you off a series, because it is so good despite that. Antique Bakery is a great time. I'm biased. Like, I'm super biased, but Flower of Life is my favorite. Unfortunately, it's hard to recommend because the first 3 volumes are easy to find. The last one is pretty much impossible to find. I would say if you're wanting to get into her work more so nowadays, All My Darling Daughters is a good starting place. Oku and What Did You Eat Yesterday, as long as you enjoy cooking manga, are good places. I know that certain volumes of What Did You Eat Yesterday are hard to find as well. It's hard to know, because despite having a lot of similarities over the broadness of her titles, it's also, they're all very starkly different from each other. Different genres, different settings, different demographics as well. So, yeah. Just read her stuff. Like, honestly, read her stuff. Because it's not just this book that was nominated for an Eisner. It was Yoshinaga herself who was nominated for an Eisner. So, yeah. Check her stuff out. And in saying that as well, considering she's not like a super well-known, super popular creator, she we have almost every single one of her books available in English. Everything. There's one book of hers that we don't have, which is a short story collection. And I don't know why we don't have that one, because it seems like that would make a sense to have that. But everything else, literally everything else we have, which is great for me. But it also means that a lot of her DMP stuff, a lot of her BL stuff released by Tokyo Pop back in the day is pretty easy to find. So yeah, I'm going to stop gushing over Yoshinaga. Difficult, I know, but I don't want to bore you guys too much. And I think it's also a pretty good point to wrap up this week. There wasn't a huge amount insofar as reading that I did, but I think we had a pretty healthy discussion despite that, as per usual. Oh, I'm glad that you enjoy Ooku. That's exciting. That's fun to hear. So yeah, definitely check out her other stuff. I will say that if you're wanting to get into Flower of Life, again, Volume 4 is impossible to find, and it's sad because that's the last volume is what makes it a masterpiece, in my opinion. But the first, like the end of Volume 3 is also a good stopping point. So, you know, if you wanted to read it and end there and be like, okay, maybe that's all I'll ever read, that might be a possibility. But by the same token, every so often, the fourth volume does pop up, and for not that crazy prices. I mean, you can find volume 4 for crazy prices, 200 plus USD, but don't pay that. Don't pay that. But if you are desperate, like every so often, a volume will show up for $50 or $35 or whatever. And if you really are wanting it, then that's when you should jump on it, but otherwise not. Yeah, and what did you eat yesterday? 90% cooking manga, 10% the most amazing depiction of a established domestic couple, gay couple, and all of the issues and elements and things that just happen when you've been in a relationship with someone for so long. It's family stuff and work stuff and relationship stuff. It's just super good. Plus, delicious food. Really delicious food. And it always looks really good. You're like, dang it, why can't I have some? But at the same time, you can have some because it teaches you how to make it. It teaches you how to make it. And the food is also realistic, because Shiro, the chef of the two, well, the cook of the two, he's not a chef. He's like, oh, I'll get, green beans and spinach because they're in season, so they're cheap. And we've got some of this fish left over, and we've got some of, we'll just reuse some of this potato salad, so that'll be one side. And it's normal. If you cooked for people, if you're the main cook in the house, and you don't want to spend a huge amount of money every time you go to the grocery store, you have these little things of okay, well, how can I make this into another meal? How do I work this into 5 meals? Or we're not going to eat all this, so we'll freeze it, and maybe we'll, have some more. We'll just reheat it for when I don't feel like cooking, that sort of thing. And it's not something that comes up in cooking manga or cooking any media typically, because it's all oh, look at all these cool, fun things that might take money to make, a lot of money and skill and time, and unrealistic for a working individual or a parent with a family, especially a working parent with a kid. It's just unrealistic. So yeah. So I'm gonna, again, sorry, I went on another tangent of Yoshinaga, but I could do that for hours, which is why we did a podcast about it. I did try to get as much of that gushing out as I could during then, but obviously obviously I will never stop. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. A little bit of an odd one this week, and I know a little bit of an odd time as well for people. I did start earlier because of daylight saving shift, and it means that it's a little bit earlier for me where I am. And I don't, maybe for the people watching in the US, it should be the same time as it was last week because they're daylight savings. But I also kind of want to see if starting at 9 p.m. my time versus 10 p.m. impacts me, because I'm typically really tired after these and I want to go to bed. You know this. I don't make a secret of that. So having it a little bit earlier means that I'm not just like deliriously exhausted at the end of the hour and a half. So I hope that that's understandable. And if people hate it too much, I will go back to the 10 p.m., but I kind of don't want to. And it's my channel, so I'm allowed to make the decisions here. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Hopefully I'll have more books to talk about next week. I'm hoping to do some reading tomorrow, although I do have a review to film and a couple other things. And I also finished my lights for the puck light stuff for my collection. I actually posted photos of that on Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter at collectinggis is down. If I take there, that's my Twitter handle here, just here. So you can follow me there. You can get updates about whatever I'm reading or what I'm thinking about stuff, or the podcast when it's released. All of that stuff. All the normal stuff that I always do anyway. But thank you guys so much for watching. Have a wonderful rest of your weekend. And I will see you in the next live stream, which will be same time, same place next week. Have a good one. Read lots of manga. And yeah, enjoy.